Good afternoon, everybody. I'm joined here today by our justice critic, MLA Irfan Sabir, and we're joining you today from the traditional territory of Treaty 6, and also would like to acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who share a very deep connection with this land. Yesterday, Albertans were shown a video which it contained deeply, deeply disturbing elements. In particular, what we saw was the Premier of Alberta engaged in an 11-minute conversation with someone on the eve of their trial, where they were about to be tried for 2 criminal charges relating to their participation in a blockade which caused almost $1 billion of economic loss to the people of this province, and where one of the charges alleged the fellow was encouraging violence against police officers. Now, when we saw the video, I waited to see what the Premier would say about this shocking display. I was disappointed to see that we heard nothing directly from her. Instead, we got statements trying to claim that there was nothing new or different in the video. For a variety of reasons, that is completely incorrect. And the most important of which I want to describe is simply this. We see evidence, we see the Premier talking about how she had previously spoken already to the Deputy Attorney General of Alberta, who, by the way, is a Crown prosecutor, about the specific tactical elements of the prosecution of Mr. Pawlowski's criminal charges. And then she turns around and says she will do so again. This is not a broad conversation with your Attorney General about the administration of justice. This is clear evidence of interference with the judicial system by the Premier of Alberta through the Deputy Attorney General on the basis of the particular elements of a criminal charge and the conduct of that charge and the trial. It's unprecedented. So, and the evidence of political interference is black and white. It is prima facie. There's no way to get around it. So as a result of that, I'm here today to call for 2 things. First of all, and most immediately, the Premier must stop this cat and mouse game of hiding from the people of Alberta, of putting out statements which are irrelevant, filled with red herrings or sometimes only partially true. And instead, she must present herself to the people of Alberta through the media to answer as many questions as are necessary until the concerns about this are allayed, or until at least people know exactly what happened. Secondly, we must have a judicial investigation into the conduct of this claim. All of the staff in the Premier's office must be made available for questioning by an independent judge. Crown prosecutors should be given whistleblower protection and made available for questioning by the independent judge. The Deputy Attorney General, or the former Deputy Attorney General, must be made available for questioning by an independent judge. Emails sent prior or immediately, any time after the Premier became the Premier in early October, must be made available. And a report has to be completed and presented to Albertans within 30 days. Why so quickly? Because we are about to go into an election. And we have an unprecedented demonstration here of political interference into our judicial system. Our democracy rests on some very fundamental principles. And one of those principles, one of the most important, if not the most important principle, is that the judicial system and the legislative system must be kept separate. We have evidence here of a Premier casually breaching that and interfering with the system of justice. We cannot have our democracy undermined in the way she has clearly just done on the eve of an election without Albertans getting the opportunity to see the scope of the corruption that has been perpetrated by this Premier and perhaps through actions of her staff. So it's critically important that this happen. It's critically important to the strength of our government here in Alberta now and well into the future, as well as it being critically important to the integrity of our system of justice. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions folks here might have.
And we'll start with questions in the room.
Hi there, Julia Wong, CBC National. Just a point of clarification first. The difference between judicial review and independent investigation, which is what you guys had previously been calling for, just walk us through what those differences are.
For sure. The term judicial review actually refers to a type of process in the courts that happens at any given day. And that's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is an investigation that is headed by an independent judge, not unlike what we saw with the Adele Kent case when the previous UCP Attorney General called the chief of police over the fact that he had received a traffic ticket.
And so then my first question is, the calls for an independent investigation have been shot down thus far. What makes you think this call for a judicial review would be any different?
Well, I think that the situation has changed. Yesterday, we saw a video where the Premier spoke at great length about his criminal case with someone about to go to trial, and said that she had spoken already and was going to speak again to the Deputy Attorney General, the Chief Crown Prosecutor, about the specific way in which his case was being prosecuted. We did not have that before. We had a he said, she said thing before. We had CBC saying, we understand this is the case, and them saying, well, prove it, and then saying, oh, we didn't do it. Well, now we have video evidence that the Premier interfered with the administration of justice. If video evidence of the Premier claiming to interfere with the administration of justice is not enough to get this group over there to take seriously the damage that they are doing to our democracy, to our government, to our judicial system, then I don't know what possibly is.
Earlier today, I asked the Deputy Premier whether it was appropriate for the Premier to be taking a call from someone awaiting trial. And he said that the Premier is free to speak with anyone she wishes to speak to. What do you make of that response? And what, if any, concerns do you have about leadership of this particular party and their judgment in particular?
Well, the comments by the former Attorney General, who failed upwards to Deputy Premier after being kicked out of his job because he claimed it was okay for him to call the Chief of Police about his own traffic ticket, who was then contradicted by a judge who did an independent review, quite frankly, are not the comments that are worth an ounce of anything when it comes to determining who has done anything appropriate or not appropriate in this province. He has no credibility on this matter. It shows the fact that he's the Deputy Premier, quite frankly, doesn't reflect well on the judgment of this Premier. The fact that he would say such a thing doesn't reflect well on his judgment. But most importantly here, the real issue is the leadership of this province. It's the Premier herself saying these things, not understanding how profoundly troubling they are, what the consequences of these things are, what their implications are for a parliamentary democracy and the system of justice in our province, and then hiding from the people of Alberta. It's just not acceptable.
Was Julie asked him directly, should a Premier be contacting an accused before trial? And he's basically said, yes, it's okay. But the rationale to me was interesting, is he said, as long as the Premier is acting within what she deems to be the greater good, i.e. protection of the province, reducing social divisions over COVID, as long as she's acting within her self-appointed mandate, she is free to talk to whoever she wants, including talking to people accused in a criminal trial. Now, I don't know if this is Casey Madu or this reflects the mood of the government, but to my mind, does that not, if this is the mindset of the government, what are we dealing with here?
Well, let me say, I can only speculate about whether it's the mindset of the government. I can only speak to Casey Madu. And I will tell you that Casey Madhu comes to this conversation with zero credibility, because in the past he has said that he has the right to do certain things, and then independent judges have said, no, actually, you're wrong, you don't. But more importantly, that statement, that characterization of their so-called unending, all-consuming authority and power in the province of Alberta is absolutely, completely inaccurate. And it represents a disturbing threat to the stability of our democracy and of the separation between the legislative and the judicial branches of government. So no, the Premier does not, on the basis of her own discretion and what she thinks is best for people, get to arbitrarily call up a convicted, call up a judge, call up a prosecutor. No, that's ridiculous. It's just not true.
Well, it's political. I have one question and another unrelated follow, but what kind of system, you're a political scientist, what kind of system do we have here where if the government can interfere in criminal cases, call whoever they want, if they deem it to be in the greater good as they define it, what type of political system are we operating under here?
Well, I mean, we're on the verge of a Tin Pot dictatorship, but let's be clear, only if they don't step up and recognize the significance of the mistakes that they have made, and they must do that. But it is, I mean, you start ripping apart the fundamental tenets of democracy, you move into dictatorship. It's that simple. It's a dictatorship on the basis of, as Mr. Madhu suggested, the discretion of the Premier. That's not how democracy works. There are always constitutional limits on the rule of the majority within the democracy. Those limits are provided by the judicial system and by the Constitution as a whole. That's the way our system works in Canada. Otherwise, you would have the majority overruling the fundamental rights of the minority all the time. And so that's how a democracy works in not only Commonwealth countries, but Western democracies around the world. And so Danielle Smith is either, incredibly uninformed about her roles and responsibilities, or she is intentionally lying to the people of Alberta about what it is she thinks she's able to do.
And a quick question, sorry, Ben, to clarify just with your legal hat on. So it was pointed out to me today that in that phone call, the Premier, who is basically representative of the government, of the Crown, tells the accused in a criminal trial that the charges against him and others related to this case are politically motivated. Does that not corrupt the case against Pawlowski?
Everything
I mean, if the Crown admits to you, this is capricious and malicious, and it's not grounded in law, why is that case, do you think, going ahead then?
Well, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, there are a number of things about what was revealed in that video yesterday that are deeply troubling and are different than what the conversation has been up until now. And you describe another one. Almost every element of what Danielle Smith said and did in that video represent an unacceptable level of political interference of our system of justice. And let's be clear here. It's not, she said at one point, oh, I thought I had the powers of the President of the United States, and it turned out I did, and oops. Danielle Smith didn't arrive yesterday. She has been involved in public life, political life, for over a quarter of a century. She knows, or she should know, full well the basic tenets of our parliamentary democracy and the way in which the legislative branch of government, the executive branch of government, and the judicial branch of government interact with each other. Anyone who's finished 2 or 3 years of university have learned those things. Anyone who spent 25 years practicing as a spokesperson and as a politician and as a policymaker in the space of public policy as she has knows those things. So she either has incomprehensibly bad judgment, or she is intentionally driving right over long-standing principles that protect our democracy for the sake of achieving power. Or she's just lying, or a combination of all three. But none of them bode well for the future of our democratic system, our legislative system, our governance. I'm looking across at the legislature right now, And I worry right now. I worry about what we're seeing.
Catherine Gurkowski, Alberta Today. So you say you want to give Crown prosecutors whistleblower protection under this judicial investigation. I'm thinking yesterday in the Premier's statement, she basically accused you of trying to bring Crown prosecutors into disrepute and said that the Crown Prosecution Service has publicly said there was no contact. But you're today saying that the Premier indeed said that she spoke with the Deputy Attorney General, who is the Chief Crown Prosecutor. And I'm hoping you can kind of spell out more why do you think Crown prosecutors need to be given whistleblower protection?
The same reason you can't have the Premier engaging in conversations with Crown prosecutors about cases, because the Premier decides who gets hired and who gets fired. The Premier writes the law. The Premier decides what resources Crown prosecutors have to prosecute cases. The Premier decides whether courts get money to function. The Premier decides whether police officers are hired to investigate things. The Premier decides whether to hire or fire the Chief Electoral Officer. I mean, in a slightly different context. But they have power over these things, and that is why they cannot be expected to not import influence. And because the Premier's already been dragged so far into this, it means that there is a reasonable expectation that folks within the prosecution services are nervous about their security, because they've never seen anything like this before. They've never seen anybody run roughshod over parliamentary and constitutional traditions the way this Premier has. In addition, it's ironic that you would say that, because of course, as has just been pointed out, the Premier herself called into question the integrity of the Crown Prosecutor Service in that video. In 11 minutes, she found multiple ways to question the integrity of people working in the Crown. So it's absolutely to be expected that folks would be nervous about coming clean, about any conversations that they had with either the Premier or representatives of the Premier out of the Premier's office about the prosecution of these cases.
And a quick one. So both the Premier and her executive director said what you're saying and what was reported is defamatory. I imagine if you had been sued by now, you'd be waiving the statement of claim. But have you heard anything more on whether they intend to sue you for defamation for what you're alleging?
Well, you know, the truth to defamation, or the defense to defamation is the truth, and the judge gets the chance to engage in a full investigation of what is the truth. So should that happen, I welcome the opportunity.
We'll go to questions on the phone now. Just a reminder to press *9 if you're on the phone. Use the raise hand function if you're joining us via Zoom. If you could say your name and your outlet at the top, that'd be great. We'll go to our first caller.
You guys got me?
Go ahead.
Perfect. Tim Brooks, CTV. Just wondering here, if there is this judicial review that you're calling for, if that review finds that the Premier was directly contacting Crown prosecutors, pressuring Crown prosecutors, what do you want to see happen?
Well, I guess at that point, presumably, if that were to happen in 30 days, then I think she'd basically have to resign, call the election, and begin the election campaign by apologizing to Albertans for attempting to interfere in the administration of justice in the province of Alberta. And I suppose at that point, Albertans would have the opportunity to say, yeah, that really was a frontal attack on the state of our democracy, but we still think we want to vote for you. And that opportunity would happen. But it should happen that way. It should not happen as a result of the Premier hiding from Albertans on this issue and sending out misleading paper statements that nobody can question.
Any follow-up, Tim?
Yeah, you've been calling for this independent investigation since January. Now we're asking for a judicial review. We haven't heard from the Premier. I believe she cancels the event next week. I'm just wondering, is there any reason for Albertans to believe that we are going to get straight answers from the premier?
You know, I think it just comes down to the issue of pressure being put and accountability being demanded. So I can't speculate what the Premier is ultimately going to do, and the point at which she steps up and acknowledges the many, many principles of our democracy and our system of independent justice that she has breached, and the point at which she will then do the right thing and try to clear the air. I can't speculate on that. All I can do is point out that this is unprecedented. I don't even know that I can think of any example of something like this anywhere in the history of Canada, where we see a premier on video talking to someone about to go to trial about how she's going to talk to the chief prosecutor of the province about changing the way they prosecute that case. I just don't think we've ever seen anything like this. And so as a result, I can't speculate on what they will do. All I can say is that if she has any respect for Albertans, any respect for our system of justice, any respect for our system of democracy, she must come clean, and she must find an independent vehicle through which to clear the air. Let's remember, if she has nothing to hide, she shouldn't be scared of this. Although a lot of it's already out in the open, but whatever. You know.
We'll go to our next caller.
Hello, I guess that's me. Rick Bell, Calgary Sun. I believe, Rachel, you were elected, I think, going back in my sort of foggy memory, around 2008, I think, was when you were first elected.
Yeah, a little long in the tooth, yes. Thank you for reminding me, Rick. That's great. Yeah.
I just had some dental work yesterday, so I know all about it being long in the tooth. So that's 15 years. And in that 15 years in the legislature, you've seen many things, including the resignation of a premier under a cloud of controversy, former Premier Redford, and you've seen all kinds of attacks on cronyism and corruption in the former Progressive Conservative government. You were in the House when those attacks were launched, day after day after day. How does this particular episode rate in the time that you have been in the legislature, where there has been admittedly, a lot of various and sundry political happenings? As I say, including the resignation of a premier under controversy, under fire. How does this rate in your books?
Well, you know, it's a really good question there. You know, Rick, let me just start by saying, bottom line, this is next level. Complete next level interference with justice. Complete, frankly, another word for it is corruption. And in this, I'm not suggesting that the Premier is making money off of this or anything like that. Let me be very clear. But she is interfering into what should be an independent process on behalf of friends and pretty odd friends, to say the least. And the reality is that I've never seen anything like this, because, you know, we had previous examples where it was people and politicians, you know, getting their hands caught in the cookie jar, for a lack of a better description. This is attacking the very bread and butter of our democratic system, Rick. You cannot have unfettered power in the office of the Premier. There are limits. And our Constitution, for as long as we have been a country, has said that those limits are defined by an independent judicial system. And I have never in my career, nor in my study of the history of this country, seen video evidence of a premier interfering directly in an individual case the way we have video evidence of this premier doing just that.
Any follow-up, Rick?
Yes, and my follow-up is, what is your strategy if they just say, as I said yesterday, nothing really to see here, and if there's nothing to really see
I think that's a bit of a moving target, but I think this is a very clear example of the fact that Albertans cannot trust Danielle Smith to tell the truth about anything. And we're on the eve of an election, and she is lying about what she did on video to people. She's actually lying to people about what it says and what happened on that video. And so people are going to see that she's quite comfortable lying to them. And then that's going to, that's likely going to have an impact on whether people actually believe she's not going to start making them pay for their doctor's visits, or that she's not going to raid their CPP in order to play a political game with Ottawa, or she's not going to try to privatize her police. And by the way, can we talk a moment about that? Exactly, or sorry, not privatize, but get rid of the RCMP. Can you imagine someone who thinks it's okay to randomly call the chief prosecutor of the province and advocate on behalf of someone who's about to go to trial, having that person have direct say over the conduct of the police? I mean, Albertans should be worried about that. What if you don't agree with Danielle Smith? What's she going to do then? What's she going to tell the police to do? Nobody knows.
We'll go to our next caller.
Hi there, Rachel. It's Michelle Belfontaine from CBC. I'm just going to ask you about a different topic. Tory Tanner, the UCP candidate, or former UCP candidate in Lethbridge West, has resigned. I'm wondering, first of all, your reaction to all of this, what she said on that video, and her subsequent resignation.
Let me say this. Let me start by saying, you know, I've been troubled, as I think a lot of folks have been, by increased discriminatory attacks on a whole range of Albertans, whether we're talking Black Muslim women or whether we are talking members of the LGBTQ2S plus community. We are seeing a range of hateful, discriminatory attacks. The video that we saw from that UCP candidate yesterday was an effort to normalize the conversation around that hateful narrative. And that kind of thing has to be called out immediately. And it absolutely cannot be something that someone is saying while seeking public office for what theoretically is still a mainstream party. And it's not enough that the UCP came in and said, oh, she took down the video. The UCP should have immediately fired her as a candidate, and they should have then apologized to a whole range of Albertans for allowing somebody with views that discriminatory to be their candidate. Instead, they simply took no responsibility. They took down the video as though that was good enough, and then she walked away on her own accord. But it does not reflect well on the UCP and the standard that they are requiring of their candidates and the level of extremism that is seeping in to that party in all quarters of the province.
Any follow-up, Michelle?
Yes, please. Presumably she was vetted by the party, because that's oftentimes where we don't know who's running right away. They want to vet them first and then let them run for nominations. So I guess what is your take on the fact that she somehow got through the vetting process for the party?
Well, you know, I can't speak to how much of these views came up in the vetting. Vetting is not 100% proof. All I can speak to is how the UCP reacted once the video became public. And because I have no idea when that video was made and all that kind of stuff. So I really don't know if they were aware or who the vetter was and what they were aware of. All I know is that she made some deeply offensive, discriminatory statements that normalizes a form of hate speech that is impacting Albertans of all types all across this province. And the UCP failed to call it out. They have not issued an apology. And they seem to think that because she's left on her own accord, the matter's done. But I think it reflects very, very poorly on the party for not stepping up to issue an apology on behalf of their former candidate.
We'll go to our next caller.
Hi, it's Lisa Lisa from the Journal. I'm wondering, I just want to go back to one of the questions that Julia was asking there, because my understanding when Irfan was originally making calls for an independent investigation, that would look similar to the Adele Kent review of Casey Madhu. So I'm still confused about what the difference is between that independent inquiry and the judicial review that you're calling for today. Could you expand on that a bit?
To be clear, there's not a lot of difference. We used the wrong, I would argue, a bit of a confusing term in our media notice. We are looking for an independent judicial investigation. What's different about what I'm calling for today simply is that this is so significant that it must be started and completed within 30 days. And as I said, you know, we made the call. We were waiting to see what the UCP would, how they would respond to this video evidence of their premier interfering or attempting to interfere or claiming she was going to interfere with the administration of justice. And then we were disappointed to see that they collapsed into their old patterns of the cat and mouse game and hiding from the press and issuing misleading statements. So So we're back here to say, no, this is not the same thing. There are deeply consequential and serious components to the video that was released today. And so the urgency of that independent review that we called for back in January has been accelerated or amplified considerably because we have black and white video evidence of the premier claiming to interfere in the administration of justice. And Casey Madhu is off in la-la land in terms of his defense. The premier does not have unfettered control, not in a Canadian democracy.
Any follow-up, Lisa?
Okay, yeah, that clarifies things. So it's essentially a reiteration of the same call, but with a few more specifics and a more urgent timeline. And the whistleblower protection for Crown prosecutors, I think that you mentioned.
Absolutely, and also ensuring that they can go, because as you know, the so-called email search they did, it was subsequently concluded that they could only be sure that they got emails back about 2 months, and we know, of course, that Danielle Smith became premier in early October, so it was a whole range of emails that probably weren't even caught by the so-called search, and of course we would want that email search to be managed by an independent someone with independent oversight rather than the Premier's office, which of course means nothing, quite frankly, in terms of the integrity of the so-called email search.
And that's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Watching, and to learn more, check out albertasfuture.ca.